Humanity's Greatest Dream, April 10th, 1912. Early morning. The port of Southampton, on England's southern coast, was waking up in a cool, salty breeze. The ship at the dock wasn't just any ship. It was confidence. It was pride. It was a whole era believing in itself. A victory of steel, steam, and mathematics. It was 882 feet long, 4 massive smokestacks. Smoke rising slowly into the sky. People were waving, some were crying, some were smiling. But no one, not a single person, knew how short their time really was. 2. Slow steps on deck. On the first-class deck, people walked slowly. They had nowhere to rush to. Wealthy businessman John Jacob Astor IV stood quietly, staring at the ocean. His wife stood beside him. Their unborn child was on the way. They had plans. When people think they own the future, they tend to underestimate the present. Below deck, life looked very different. A young Irish couple sat side by side in a small cabin. She carefully folded clothes in their suitcase. He imagined the factory job he'd start in America. For them, Titanic wasn't luxury. It was a bridge. 3. Days at sea. The ship stopped in Cherbourg, France, then departed from Queenstown off the Irish coast, and soon it was alone in the open Atlantic. The days were calm. People took long walks on deck. Afternoon tea was served. Pianos played softly. Below, engineers and coal stokers worked nonstop, shoveling coal, surrounded by the rhythm of the engines. For them, time was measured in machinery. There was order, and order makes people feel safe. April 4th, April 14th, 1912. Clear skies, calm seas. Several iceberg warnings came in throughout the day. The ship never slowed down, because speed felt like strength, and human psychology is easily impressed by size. Titanic was massive, so everyone on board felt untouchable. 5. Nightfalls. That night, there was no moon. The ocean was like glass, and that was the most dangerous condition of all. Without waves, icebergs are almost invisible. Lookout Frederick Fleet stood in the crow's nest. His breath turned to mist. He rubbed his hands together, and then a shape in the darkness. Black, but darker than the black around it. The bell rang 3 times. 6. 11:40 p.m. The wheel turned hard, engines reversed, but physics doesn't panic. A massive body doesn't change direction instantly. Ice scraped along the hull, a long metallic tearing sound. An engineer below deck looked up. That's not normal. But no one screamed yet. No one ran, because disaster always whispers first. 7. The first to understand. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, examined the damage. Water was pouring into the lower compartments. He did the math. 6 compartments were flooding. 4 could have been survivable. 6 was too many. His face didn't change, but his eyes did. The ship will sink. He said it quietly, because truth never rushes. 8. Denial. Life jackets were handed out. Many people were still smiling. Some first-class passengers even joked. This ship can't sink. But ships don't float on belief. They float on physics. Lifeboats were lowered, half full, because no one wanted to leave. 9. Time is running out. Around 1 a.m., the ship began tilting forward. People stumbled as they walked. Water kept rising below. A mother held her child tighter. A man looked at his wife. There was so much left to say, but not enough time. 10. The music. The musicians kept playing. In the freezing air, the sound of a violin cut through the night like a thin silver line. Maybe to calm the fear. Maybe to hold on to their humanity. Sometimes music is the last defense. 11. 2:18 a.m. The lights flickered, then went out. Darkness, the sound of metal snapping. The ship broke in two. The front slipped under the water. The back rose into the stars for a few final minutes. And then the Atlantic took it. 12. The water. The water was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Screams filled the night, but not for long. Cold is fast, very fast. Soon there was only the sound of the ocean and the stars above. 13. Morning. At the horizon, a light appeared. Rescue ship, RMS Carpathia. Survivors were pulled aboard. Blankets were wrapped around them. But some emptiness never goes away. The psychology of survivors at sea. The hidden side of survival. Night. From the surface, the water looks calm. But water has always been one of the deepest symbols of fear in the human mind. Loss of control. The feeling of drowning. Silence. And the unknown. People who survive a shipwreck, a boating accident, or a disaster in open water don't just survive physically. They begin an entirely different journey, a psychological one. Because water doesn't just test your body, it tests your mind. 1. The first moment, shock and mental freeze. In a disaster, the brain's first reaction is usually shock. But shock isn't dramatic screaming like we imagined. Most of the time, it's a kind of freezing. Survivors often say, everything slowed down. The sounds felt far away. It was like watching a movie. This is the brain's defense mechanism against trauma. The amygdala senses danger, and the body switches into fight or flight mode. But in water, you often can't fight, and you can't run. So a third response appears. Freeze. Some people go completely still. Some go into autopilot. Some make irrational decisions. This isn't weakness. It's the brain trying to keep you alive. 2. Survival mode. The primitive brain takes over. When someone falls into cold water, the body goes into alarm within seconds. Breathing becomes uncontrolled. The heart races. Muscles tighten. But here's the interesting part. In that moment, the brain doesn't think like a modern human. It thinks like a primitive one. Logic fades, emotions sharpen, time feels distorted. Some survivors describe feeling strangely calm. Others remember pure panic and losing control. The difference isn't personality. It's how the brain reacts under extreme stress. And one thing matters more than anything else: hope. When hope fades, physical resistance drops too. Those who hold on to hope often survive longer. 3. The moment of rescue. Emotional disconnection. When someone is pulled from the water, everyone assumes the relief is instant. But psychologically, that's often when a new phase begins. Many survivors say, "When I realized I was safe, I couldn't cry. I felt nothing. There was just emptiness." This is emotional numbness, the first stage after trauma. After extreme stress, the brain protects itself by temporarily shutting emotions down. The body is out of the water, but the mind is still there. 4. Why water? Trauma is different. Water trauma has a unique quality because water represents loss of control, a silent death, an invisible threat. In a fire, you see the flames. In an earthquake, you feel the shaking. But in water, death is often quiet. That's why survivors commonly experience panic when hearing water sounds, shortness of breath in the shower, avoiding pools or the ocean, intense anxiety at the sight of the sea. These symptoms can look a lot like PTSD. 5. Survivor's guilt. Why am I alive? One of the heaviest psychological burdens is this. survivor's guilt, especially after shipwrecks. This feeling is common. Survivors think, I could have saved them. If we had switched places, they'd be alive. Why was I the one who made it? These thoughts may not be logical, but trauma doesn't operate on logic. The brain searches for meaning. If it can't find it, it creates guilt, and that guilt can last for years. 6. Flashbacks and nightmares. Many people who survive water disasters relive the moment over and over again. Close their eyes. They hear the water. They feel the drowning sensation. The cold comes back. This happens because the brain hasn't fully processed the trauma. Trauma isn't stored like a normal memory. It stays fragmented. Sounds, smells, cold. The feeling of not being able to breathe. That's why even the sound of running water can trigger it. 7. Identity shift. The old me and the new me. Many survivors say, I was never the same after that day. And it's not just a phrase. After trauma, people often move in one of two directions: living in constant fear and anxiety, or completely redefining how they see life. Some, after facing death, begin to live more intentionally. They become more compassionate. They slow down. They appreciate small things. In psychology, this is called post-traumatic growth. But the process isn't easy. 8. Silence and feeling. Misunderstood. Survivors often feel alone because people tend to say, it's over now. At least you survived. Just move on. But trauma isn't something you just forget. What a survivor needs most is this: to feel understood. Without that, they withdraw. They stop talking about it. But the mind doesn't go quiet. 9. Facing water. Again. Some survivors never enter the ocean again. Others choose to face it deliberately. This usually happens in two ways: avoidance or controlled exposure. In therapy, gradual exposure is common. First, the sound of water, then images, then dipping a foot in. The brain slowly relearns. The danger is over. 10. Is healing possible? Yes. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing means your heart doesn't race when you remember. Your body doesn't freeze at the sound of water. The memory becomes a past event, not a present threat. Recovery often requires trauma therapy, like EMDR, a safe space to talk social support, and time. 11. The deepest truth. One thing almost all survivors say is this: in that moment, you understand how fragile life really is. And that awareness creates two possible paths: constant fear or a deeper desire to truly live. Which path becomes stronger depends on support, personality, environment, and time. 12. Final words. Water is silent. Memory is not. A person can be pulled out of the ocean, but the waves inside their mind may continue for a while. And sometimes, the real battle begins after reaching shore. 1985. The discovery of the wreck. The silent witness in the deep. By 1985, the dark waters of the North Atlantic were still holding on to a secret. A wreck searched for over 73 years. A legend. A frozen moment of tragedy. This is the story of how the RMS Titanic was finally found. 1. A search that lasted. Decades after sinking in 1912, Titanic's exact location was never clearly known. There were survivor accounts. There were rough coordinates, but nothing precise. Strong currents, total darkness, depths exceeding 13,000 feet. For the technology of that era, finding her was nearly impossible. By the 1970s and 80s, deep-sea exploration technology had finally begun to evolve. Systems developed during the Cold War were now being adapted for scientific discovery. And one name stepped into the spotlight: Robert Ballard II. The Secret Mission. Officially, Ballard's 1985 expedition was organized to search for Titanic. But behind the scenes, there was another objective. The U.S. Navy wanted to examine two previously lost nuclear submarines, USS Thresher, USS Scorpion. Once Ballard completed that classified task, he would be allowed to use the remaining time to search for Titanic, which meant one thing: time was limited. 3. New technology. Argo. The key tool in the expedition was a remotely operated camera system called Argo. Argo hovered just above the ocean floor, recording continuous video. But Ballard used a different strategy. Instead of searching directly for the massive ship, he searched for debris first. Because when large ships sink, they don't land in one perfect piece. They leave behind a debris field, a trail. Find the trail, and you find the ship. 4. The moment. September 1st, 1985. Just after midnight, the team had been scanning the ocean floor for days. Fatigue was setting in. Hope was fading. And then, on the camera screen, a round shape appeared. A boiler. One of Titanic's boilers. Silence filled the room. No one shouted. No one cheered. Because this wasn't just a discovery. It was a gravesite. Soon after, the massive bow emerged from the darkness. The front of the ship still stood upright, as if defying time. But time had marked it, with rust, bacteria, and iron formations known as rusticles. The depth. The wreck lay nearly 12,500 feet below the surface. The pressure was hundreds of times greater than at sea level. No sunlight ever reached that place. There was only darkness and a frozen moment in history. 5. A shattered truth. During the exploration, another shocking reality became clear. Titanic had split in two. The bow and stern were located about 2,000 feet apart. Between them lay a vast debris field filled with wreckage and personal belongings. For decades, there had been debate about how the ship sank. Now, the ocean had answered. 6. The psychological impact. For the team, this wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. Later, Ballard said, "We approached it with reverence, as a cemetery." The team decided not to disturb the wreck. Nothing was taken. In that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't treasure. It was history. 7. The world reacts. When the discovery was announced, headlines spread across the globe. Titanic was no longer just a legend. It was real. A physical wreck. Resting at the bottom of the cold Atlantic, slowly being consumed by time. 8. The end of 73 years of silence. From 1912 to 1985, the mystery had endured. Now it was over. But new questions began. How long would the wreck survive? How much should humanity interfere? Was it a research site or a grave? Ballard's message was clear. This site should be protected. Final words. That night, in the darkness of the Atlantic, a small camera light brought one of history's greatest maritime tragedies back into view. Titanic was no longer lost, but it was still silent. And in that silence lay the heaviest truth of the deep.